Welcome to the Kind Leader Podcast, where empathy meets action in the world of leadership. Your host, Gino Degregori, engages with innovators and seasoned professionals from diverse sectors, all demonstrating the power of leading with kindness. And now, your host, Gino Degregori.
Most leaders spend their time trying to eliminate friction, reduce waste, and create efficiency. But what if the friction is where the growth lives? What if the messy, uncomfortable edges of your organization are actually the most important places you're not paying attention to? Hi, I'm Gino Degregori, and welcome to the Kind Leader Podcast. Today, Ines Garcia has spent her career at the intersection of places that don't usually talk to each other: Agile transformation and sustainability. She's a Salesforce architecture and biomimicry, organizational design, and the wisdom of living system. She's a Salesforce MVP, Hall of Fame inductee, founder of Get Agile, and author of the book that asks what nature, with its 3.8 billion years of R&D, might teach us about how organizations actually work. What draws me to this conversation is her belief that how we build our teams and companies is not neutral choice. It has real consequences for people and for the planet. That's the Kind Leader conversation, if there ever was one. Ines, welcome to the Kind Leader Podcast. Now that I share a little bit about your background, will you please expand on that?
Yeah, thanks for that intro. So I feel that maybe here I should give a bit of context of my diverse work. So I come from communications background. I have a double degree in comms, that's advertising, PR, marketing, like forever ago. And over time, that work landed me in internal communications. And that sort of led me deeper into how organizations function themselves. Not just what they say, but how they actually work. And also into digital. And that's early 2000s sort of boom. And digital solutions are great enablers, but we need the humans on the loop. So that led me into Agile and Lean in the way that we deliver that part of technology and enhancements within the organization. So those principles of iterative, incremental approaches, because we aim to increase predictability and reduce risk. And then I kept noticing that we were just looking at reducing of waste of one variable, waste of one dimension, waste of time. And through my values and how I see the world, I've been expanding my practice into how do we also include reduction of effort, of waste of finance, of materials, energy. So that sort of took me into circular economy. I took an executive program with Cambridge University on that front. And circular economy has the third principle, which is regenerate natural systems. We don't tend to think or talk about that principle very much. And that's what took me to biomimicry, which is innovation inspired by nature. Is that tapping into these 3.8 billion years of R&D, right? So that's an archive for us to learn from. So with all of this, my work today basically sits across organizational and agile coaching, circular economy, regenerative, including land design, which is a small part, but I'm very much enjoying, the biomimicry practice. And the common thread here is to help organizations, teams, and even on one-to-one, deliver better value, reduce waste, focus into what matters, and ultimately leave the place in a better state, the place, the people, the planet, the products, better than how we found it. That was long, but hopefully explains a bit the journey into what I do.
No, that was great. I mean, yeah, I was struggling with the word biomimicry, and when I was describing you, I was thinking about it because I never bump into it. So thank you for explaining that, and love to dive in a little bit more on that here shortly. So amazing career. Really looking forward to the conversation. But before we dive right into it, the first question that I love asking my guest is, what does being a kind leader mean to you?
So I will thread it together with the biomimicry. A kind leadership, I think, could be framed as a leader that is creating conditions that are conducive to life, which is literally the core ethos of the life principles of biomimicry. So being a kind leader is not just about being nice, sort of substance, but it's about designing environments that people can actually thrive. Kind leader understands that life is beyond linear and focus on the spaces where people intersect, not just on performance metrics, and nurture the edges, right? The intersections when those different people meet, the skills, the ideas meet, rather than enforcing rigid structures and silos or suppresses of command and control.
Beautiful. I never got this level of explanation because I think you're tying to your background. You know, I love the people intersection. So can you expand a little on what does that mean from like the individuals kind of crossing? Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think a concept here maybe is helpful to think about is nurture human nature. And that's a section in the chapters in the book, which is about recognizing that curiosity and sociability are sort of natural human attributes. And in my mind, a kind leader works with those impulses rather than against them. Nurture as to care, as to protect while grow, right? So it was very deliberate for me to infuse this idea of nurture human nature to help us to think about this relationship, because often we use this phrase of human nature to describe elements of behavior that are not necessarily pleasant or desirable, or as a way to show that such as behaviors are at odds with the social norms and expectations. Given that human nature, is part of nature, how can that be negative? We are accustomed ourselves to operate as an entity away from nature, where in part we are nature. We are governed by the same natural laws as everything else on this finite planet. So when you think about it, it's nonsensical that we think of it as a negative connotation, because the natural attributes of curiosity, of sociability, is what drives the desire to learn and to contribute. And I think semantics matter, like how if we shift the words that we choose in a much more organic terms. I really think small things like this can really help widen our views, like nurture human nature, becoming the edge in between our current paradigm of the humans with the world that we come from, which is the nature.
Yeah. No, I love it. Nurture human nature.
Yeah,
Sorry, my accent gets in the way in there as well.
Well,
I love that. I don't think I've ever heard that before. And one of the things that, to your point that you were saying earlier, as it relates to designing that type of environment. So at what point is there a moment in time that you remember having either an environment that you were part of that allowed you to flourish, right? Really grow into it, or an environment you've designed and created that you can expand on?
I think context is everything, and for everybody will be different. But my current setup of working as an LTD has given me the opportunity to broaden the skills and interest and productize my offering. And I thrive on that. I'm someone who's very happy to go through, into a rabbit hole and learn a lot. I could have an academic life, although I'm very practical. I like putting things in place and see how they behave. That's my experimental mind. But a mixture of these things, I think, has been a good foundation for me to be able to pursue beyond the conveyor belt of life. But that doesn't necessarily mean that going on this setup is the right answer to finding that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I was looking more for, and that answers the question, but if I can go a little bit deeper, because I really want to understand this nurture human nature. It resonates with me, but I want to go deeper so our audience can really understand a little bit more. So to your point, we are we live in this nature, right? We require sun, we require water, right? Similar to the plants and everything else, anything that lives in this world, right? So we live in those same rules, but we get caught up in the day-to-day stuff. We get caught up in the physical stuff that really is not, but go even deeper, feeding our bodies properly, right? Feeding, right? We get focused on that with AI and all that stuff. So how do you, when you go into an environment, right, that let's say you go into a new job or a new organization, or even yourself when you're coaching others, what are some of the things that you see and provide advice to those organizations to say, hey, why don't you pause? And here's some of the things that I recommend you do.
Mm. I think it's helpful to start thinking about function, and maybe we get into that a little bit more later. But with that, I mean, we humans, the way that we operate and in our inventing minds, that makes us, we think, different from other species.
Sure.
But also it can have a detriment effect. And what often happens is when we are confronted with a challenge, we start from either a blank canvas, right? It needs to come from this cognitive power, or because we created a very busy operating system of work today and very noisy, and social behavior too, then we take existing tools for the challenge at hand. And instead, what I think is helpful is to start framing the challenge of the function. What are we trying to achieve, rather than which tools and solutionizing we can grab from the shelf or from our power of the mind. And what is very helpful is once you have clarity on that function, then ask, how does nature solve that? Create community, transfer knowledge, operating flow. Think about the function, and then that opens up a wide world of opportunities. And also, we are tapping into existing solutions that have been fine-tuned for 3.8 billion years of existence.
Right. So rephrasing that, or from my understanding, so maybe the audience can get a different take on this, is, so if you have a function in an organization, think about it in a way that, how would this work in nature in a way, right? Or how, like, because that gives you a different perspective, right? As you're explaining, I'm thinking in any organization, let's take a bad organization, like this very toxic. Let's use that as an example for now, just so I can connect the dots here on what you're trying to say. And you have a leader at the top who, narcissist, normal, he's like, I don't care about it. I'm the smartest person in the room. You don't have any right answers. And he's always beating somebody out. Is that an environment where there's no hope, and you just need to run away? And it's a tough question that I'm asking, because I really want to incorporate your thoughts here and how we can. We're seeing a lot of the stuff, right, in very toxic, very disconnected environments that we're seeing out there. But how do we, as leaders, right? Let's say this person is in this middle management, right? How can this person go in there and start making a change?
So I would like to think that there is a reason for that behavior. And generally, most of us, 8 billion plus of us, are pretty decent people that wants to help contribute, have dreams and drives. Yeah. There are some psychos out there. Once we don't put them in power, we should be fine. But in terms of how a behavior of command, of control, of some of the tools I was mentioning earlier that we just grabbed and used, for example, hierarchies and org charts, those are archaic legacy tools, some of which are from the 1800s, and we haven't evolved them. Right. And how life has changed since the 1800s, right? And if we sort of bring this together with the idea of the function, right? Hierarchies in nature are a tool for a very specific function. They are for control and to avoid change, which actually is much less common in nature than our repeated narrative and reinforced narrative have been telling us. And hierarchies, filters, silos and suppresses. And I imagine that's not what you are after if you want to innovate, right?
Right. Yeah, so that's what I was getting at, right? Like, yeah, obviously we can't change people, right? But I also want to understand, especially from a living organization, like it has its own cultures, its own things. That I love the connection that you're making with nature. I just wanted to challenge it a little bit more to like, if we bump into it, we get challenged and like building the structure. I know it's taking me a while, like 18 years to build this IT company that I have. And it has, if you look at it from a nature perspective, it has evolved into so many ways, right? I've evolved in so many ways as an engineer first, as a leader, and now leading it. And I love your perspective on the nature piece, right? It's a living organization, right? So I just wanted to get a better understanding on that. I think you did a good job in explaining that. So, but as it relates to the wisdom of edges, right? If we shift a little bit more towards that, can you expand a little bit on that? Like, what does that mean again by things happen in those spaces between?
Okay, I think we need to set the scene a bit to explain that organizations don't have real boundaries. They have artificial ones, right? They are a cognitive, going back to the power of cognition, that we create to help us as humans to make sense of the diverse reality we live in. And one of the repercussions of those defined cognitive boundaries, such as where the team starts and where the team ends, is the intrinsic notion of the separation between those elements, those parties, right? Within organizational design or leadership, we focus on that team structure, on the elements, on the components that form a whole, which is an imagined order to be able to coordinate in big numbers. That's all it is. What if we focus on the edges, the connections, what comprise those spaces, and how can we design those to be sustainable, to be resilient, to be regenerative, leaving the elements in a better state? Because the most dynamic, productive, resilient spaces in natural system, they're not found at the centers. They flourish at the edges, right? Where the forest meets the meadow, where the river encounters land, where different habitats intersect. That's where abundance sort of explodes. I talk about these edge effects, right? So supporting species that couldn't survive in either of the pure environments alone, and generate innovations that neither ecosystem could produce independently. So that's a little bit about edges, but we can talk about a lot more on that front.
Yeah, I love the edges. So where water meets the land, right? There's a lot of richness, right? There's a lot of abundance. I like that in your other examples as well. Connect that to an organization. How does that, where is that edge? Where does that live, right? And like where, I'm trying to understand that like in any organization.
The truth is that we have this obsession with order, right? Tidy gardens, tidy organizations, and how we commonly imagine the order is with highly defined artificial roles and structures. And if we look at nature, as we are nature, we are governed by natural laws. Forest edges are not tidy, right? They don't have clear straight lines. And when we obsess with the elements and the clear-cut definitions, we kind of setting progress back. It's not my job. This is not my team. They didn't do this, right? This separation of entities. And when we omit the natural order with our cognitive imagined order, we generating detriment because artificial structures, that often we look at is to split and compete for resources, gaining terrain, gaining influence, and very linear, compartmentalized structures don't encourage exchange and flow. In my mind, it comes at times like the story of the goose and the golden eggs. So we were saying that some of the invented boundaries, role hierarchies, right? Those are from hundreds of years ago.
Right.
And especially the bigger, the more mature an organization is, the imagined separation between those elements is wider. The definition of the modules is tidier, is tighter, and the belief of being a truly separate entity is higher. So what is interesting is that those 3.8 billion years of strategy refinement has a very different take, a take that generates abundance. I think moving from scarcity to abundance is an outlook that could really help us to flourish in what we do.
Got it. I understand the concept. I'm still trying to, I guess is my cognitive, hierarchy mind, right? Trying to be, I'm still struggling a little bit on how can I bring that into my organization as a leader right now? What can I do today to start looking, like, is it removing the edges and start thinking more abundance? Is that more a mindset, or is there a particular thing that I could be doing that you recommend?
Well, there is not a magic thing. Through the book, we go through 6 different design principles, and I think it's very important to, and also the book is designed in a way that is very hands-on, and is that done purposefully?
Gotcha.
Because one, we learn better by doing, and we'll get that feedback of real empirical experience. And then second, do it with somebody else. Don't do it alone. And
Right.
Context is everything. Like we often, especially with your background in tech and delivery, we often think that frameworks, this framework, the other framework. Frameworks don't have their best interest at heart because they don't know you. They can, right? Context is everything. So it's helpful, but I think it's really important that we hone into this idea of context. And for example, in an organization, is there a space, you often have little pockets of opportunity where you can start creating more edges, right? How can you create movement from context? So do you have a permeable layer in the structure that is going to adapt to the changing conditions so that the elements within members, space, finance can self-allocate where that's needed? Even by interest, imagine moving to interest by design. That can generate abundance.
Gotcha. I think I get it. So for example, one edge, like I think a lot of people do think hierarchy, do think, very structure in the box, right? I am, funny enough, I was doing some type of test, I can't remember, but I don't do very well with structure. Like I don't do very well with boundaries and stuff like that. I push through or I create my own path. That's just my entrepreneurial side of me, right? So it makes it easier to understand and connect to what you're saying because I do that all the time, like go outside those lines, but as well as I become to get to know myself a little bit more, the fear, right? Like the edge is like avoiding some of those conversations, tough conversations. Being this kind leader sometimes, I don't want to have the tough conversations with people. I don't want to tell them they're not good enough and they don't belong in this company or they need to be doing something else, right? Those are, you see what I'm saying? Like those are the things that I have not been able to now. As I'm getting better and better, I feel like from an abundance mindset perspective, it allows us to be open to the possibilities, essentially, right? What if this person is not meant to be here, and I'm limiting that person's future potentially, right? It's a different perspective, but it's I think it's tied to what you're saying. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think coming from a good place, it can take you a long way. At the end of the day, we are not objects. We are beings, two-legged out of many, many different species that we want to contribute. We have dreams, we have drives. We, get out of bed in the morning with energy for something, for a day ahead. So from my perspective and the many difficult conversations I had over the years, coming from a good place, meaning well, it can really make a difference. Actually, last December, I went to Paris for a conference, and I met with someone that I used to work with 20 years ago. And she mentioned that even that we had difficult conversations, she knew that I meant well. I was coming from an honest place and I wanted better performance, which was helpful for everybody. In all honesty, I don't remember those conversations, but clearly it made an impact. So we move organizations, we change jobs, our market changes, our products. I'm not the same person that I was long ago, nor would I be the same long after. And so how we move through time in our perishable time, I think it makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate sharing there on that. One thing you were mentioning as part of your introduction is leaving things better. I really like everything as well as your book, and I think how you think, right, is when you do, whether it's technology that you're delivering, right, making it better or leaving things better, right? That's your, I believe, from your background, that's your personal mission. Same thing with leadership, right, or relationships or organizations. So can you expand on that, please, with some examples, if you don't mind?
Yeah, with pleasure. I find helpful sometimes when I'm really hooked into something difficult to let go. I really struggle with unfairness. That's how I'm wired. To give myself perspective and place myself in the future, in my last few days of life, and think back, what would I have wanted to do? Again, this notion of our time is perishable. I find that helpful. Also, the notion of how do we build resilience? And, for example, are we in delivery specific projects and technology? I mentioned before this idea of increasing predictability, reduce risk. Resilience and diversity go really hand in hand in my mind. I think nature has it all worked out for us, really. Resilience in natural systems is embodied by three very specific strategies: through variation, through redundancy, and through decentralization. These are very specific things we can put in place in our organization. And diversity is kind of the engine of these three things, right? Think of the seeds of pollination is the variety of the genetic composition and the form, right? The structure informs culture, the structure of things, so that if one strain falls, then others survive. That's not inefficiency, that's a proven strategy. And for example, we tend to think of redundancy negatively in organizations, but if one crop fails, then you can still feed your nation. It has its function. So the challenge is that our artificial structures, hierarchies, rigid org charts, siloed teams, were designed for a different era. We really need to take it up a notch. And so how can we actively work towards diversity of thought, of perspective, of approach, right? Enriching, creating abundance, right? And I think edge effects are really helpful for these things. Because the greatest biodiversity, innovation, productivity in a small space happens exactly on when difference meets difference. The magic doesn't happen at the center, it happens at the edges. Like, even think music is also the connection, the spaces in between the notes.
Yeah.
Those things happen at the intersection. So I know that the word of diversity can come with a lot of baggage, but diversity isn't just a values conversation, it's a design principle for resilience. When we design architectural technologies, we also account for redundant systems. So it's part innate for us to help us to operate better.
Yeah. But I love what you said. So thank you for those three things. And that creates the resilience and really a lot of innovation and curiosity, right? But the big thing that I notice is you need to have that psychological safe environment for people to truly thrive. You can't have all these things and at the same time have that fear environment where there's a lot of fear, right? You have to, right? Because you're not gonna grow, right? You're not gonna expand. You're not gonna flourish and that kind of stuff. So that kind of goes hand in hand with from a leadership perspective and this kind leadership kind of philosophy that I've been pushing for the last 2 years. It's about creating that environment where people can be themselves, share their thoughts, have the diversity, right? I've always welcomed people that interns come in. What do you think? What are you seeing from your eyes? You know, these people, these kids are just coming out of college. They don't know what's right, what's wrong, but they have a perspective that we could miss if we don't appreciate it. And that could feed into something better, something bigger, something that is going to improve the organization. So I love that, because the connection that you're making on the edges, I never thought about it. And I feel like I'm doing it, I don't want to say naturally, right? But I've been evolving into something like this and allowing for that ecosystem to form itself. And what you said hit me in almost like in the spiritual side, allowing things to happen from an abundance perspective, right? Don't put so much structure. People do need to follow some rules, right? Because I think there are some rules that are there, but how do you, and I feel like I'm rambling now, but I feel, but I hope it's resonating with you on what I'm saying as it relates to creating that environment where people are feeling that they can contribute and grow. So when you go into organizations, is that something that you look for? Is that something that you kind of like, whether it's the leadership or the culture, right? Understanding what is that environment? And can people feel comfortable talking, or is there fear still in that organization?
Yeah, certainly. Spaces of missing out. There's so much sort of bubbling at the back of my mind from this. One is that if you're too busy for empathy, you have to slow down. Two is that perspective, being objective is not a default, because what we see and therefore what we think is directly related to where we sit, right? You also mentioned the eyes, the fresh eyes that comes into it. And that make me think about a slight diversion, but it's, bear with me, it'll come together. So owls, the birds in nature, most creatures with good vision, they have a spherical sort of rotating eyeballs, but owls don't. Their eyes are a tube and is fixed. So to look left, what they need is, well, to like move the entire head.
Interesting, okay.
And maybe that sounds disadvantageous, but they have evolved like this, and they have a neck range, as we know, of motion far beyond any other creatures. And obviously vascular adaptations to maintain that blood supply during a rapid head movement. The owl didn't fight the constraint. It adapted around it over a long time and became what is one of the best hunters as a result. Right? And I kind of see this pattern repeated in organizations when a team or a company face a disruption. Think of restructure, market shift, a crisis. And the ones that thrive and the ones that try to revert how things were. But the ones that, like a tree bending on the wind and reshaping and becoming stronger. And one of the practitioners that I showcase in the book, Michelle, I think captures this very nicely, and is the reframing conflict not as a problem to eliminate, but as a movement through creative tension. Change, including uncomfortable change, is the ecotone, the productive edge where so much can emerge.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would encourage leaders to sit with this for a little bit, like after a shock.
Yeah.
Does your organization go back or go forward? Because staying still is also going backwards.
Yep. I mean, you said so many great things there, Ines. I really want to pull some things real quick, and I want to make sure we're good with time here.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, let's not get into AI sycophancy, but yeah.
But I like you talk about the owl. Owl is our company logo.
Look at that.
It's interesting. It's the evolution, and they're great hunters. But what resonated with me, what you said right at the beginning, if you are too busy for empathy, you need to slow down. And that's part of where we are right now in life, where things are just moving fast, right? And I think the key is like, let's slow down. Let's not control so much and try to force our way towards success, compared to like focus more on within. Whereas within your personal growth that you're trying to move, or within your team, within your company. Because you talked about the adaptation of the trees. You're bending, but you're not breaking, right? So how are you improving your life every day? How are you adjusting to life? 1% potentially, right? Being vulnerable here, I did change not my structure, but how I approached the podcast. I was prepping a couple of days ago and last night before for this meeting, and I changed certain things. And I actually fumbled because I was so used to this line that was there for me to pick up, and but I adapted, right? I adjusted. It took me a minute to understand. But what I'm trying to say is, we have to constantly be looking at ways to improve, to your point, right? Adjust, right? And don't let things that are happening take you down, right? Don't try to take control of the situation. Don't try to we live such a small time here in this world. Just enjoy, just live, just really do what really feels good within your heart, and everything follows right behind it.
Yeah.
So, any thoughts on that?
Well, we certainly in this age of distraction, and I think we need to take informed decisions to give us headspace, right? And how do we create headspace? In simple terms, does it have to be me? And does it have to be now?
Yeah. Don't put pressure, right? Don't put pressure on that. So, speaking of pressure, do you have a question for me doing the flip the mic segment here?
Yes, I do have one. So what is natural behavior or pattern mechanism, species, something you've seen in nature that particularly calls your attention, and why?
The seasons changing. It resonates with me. I live in the eastern side of the United States, and right in the middle, right outside Washington, D.C. And we do get 4 seasons. We get the spring, we get the summer, we get the fall, and we get the winter. It's funny. It just resonated. You talk about the edges, right? Where things, come together. I love the seasons changing, because you're leaving the old and you're starting something new. When I was, I think in college or starting out, I always felt like challenges when you're in the middle of challenges, you feel like, oh, this is never going to stop. This is never going to be, I'm always going to be in this situation. But if you think like nature, if you think like seasons change, this time will pass. Good things and bad things are not constant. They change, right? And that's why seasons, for me, is impactful. The other thing that I also love are waves from nature. Same concept in a way, right? There's no one single wave that are the same, right? Some are bigger, some are smaller, and they just come at you. What's pushing? You can say the air and whatever is pushing the water and all that stuff, but the reality is it's just taking its own form. And if you enjoy just watching the waves or sitting on the waves, right, and just letting life take you, that's how I recommend living life too. Allowing and adapting and living life from that perspective. So, I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
It's beautiful. Being attuned to local conditions and, regenerating, exchanging of resources. And that's what seasons and wave do. They are periods of dormancy and peak times. And I think that's also something for us to think about it. And each one has different functions as well. So, but let's not go into one of those rabbit holes. But there is just so much existing solved innovation patterns for us to tap into. I mean, the answers to our problems have already been solved. They are in the living beings around us, not in the fossils.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we're going to go into thank you for the question. That was beautiful. It felt really good to answer that from the heart. Going into rapid fire questions here. I got a few here. So nature or technology? Which one would your primary, you talk about, nurture, right? And nature, like how does nurture and nature and technology kind of go hand in hand?
Well, it's like the chicken and an egg, no? Which one came first? I think we can argue nature on this front. Beautiful. One creates the other.
That's right. Perfect. What is a favorite book that you recommend?
Oh, it's such a hard question. That's not a fair question. So many books, but I can talk to you about the one that I'm finishing now, which is Running Mycelium Running, I think, which is Paul Stamets, and just using fungi in a very practical ways to restore habitats and reprocessing chemically harm environments. And it's just incredible and super practical.
Nice. If you could have coffee with someone with us or no longer with us, who would it be and why?
Oh, my granddad. One of my favorite persons, my granddad. My great-granddad, actually, as well, because after the Civil War in Spain, he survived almost being killed by both sides. Yeah, but like create an entrepreneur to heart, created a bodega that's still running today.
Nice.
And yeah, I wish, I had more time to ask more questions.
Nice. That's awesome. One closing question for you as we start kind of closing it up. If the kind leader right now listening to this podcast could change one thing, not about their organization, but about themselves, what would you recommend?
I'd encourage to quiet the cleverness and look outside for the answers.
Outside, being in the nature, right? Like go for a walk.
Even go outside.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, sometimes just going for a walk and pausing the busy life, I get a lot of good energy, right, from doing that. So highly recommend that. And over here, we're getting ready into the spring. Beautiful for people to go out and enjoy life. So,
and we say about being stuck sometimes with a problem, we literally physically stuck as well. So keep those fluids moving, right? The juices going, and physically move, because it has a direct effect into the biological part of us.
Absolutely. It's been an amazing conversation. So many great kind of nuggets of information. It took me a minute to understand kind of the edges and what you meant by that, but I think it resonated well with me and for the audience out here. I mean, there's a lot of great things that are coming out. And one big one for me, just to circle back on that one, is, especially from a kind leadership, is the empathy. Is if you're too busy for empathy, you should slow down, right? You need to slow down. Because it's all about that organizational environment that you're creating, right? And taking care of others. And empathy is about understanding others, right? Understanding what they need and how you can help them be that better person they can be at the end of the day. So Ines, before we let you go, where can listeners find you or your book and your work?
I think the best place to go is Ines Garcia, InesGarcia.me, M-E. And then you'll find the latest book and some of the work that I do. Many things over there. Awesome. Because life is also diverse, so is my work. Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Ines. This was a truly special conversation, and I know our listeners are walking away with something real today. Not just theory, but some great examples, right? Some good things that we spoke here from the heart. And to everyone listening, thank you for being here. If this episode resonates with you, share with other leaders out there in your life who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already and leave us a review. It helps more people find this community for sure. So with that, be kind, bring value, rise together. Have an amazing day.